The black mail-order bride arrived in tears, stepping from the dusty stagecoach into a frontier town that greeted her with cold stares and cruel whispers. The trembling woman clutches a letter meant for a dead man, her dreams shattered before they began. Townspeople turn their backs, convinced she'll be gone on the next stage, another broken soul swallowed by the unforgiving West. But the quiet cowboy with gentle eyes sees something different in her tears. His calloused hand extends toward her trembling form as he whispers words that could change everything. You don't have to pretend with me. Neither knows that her arrival has awakened sleeping secrets buried with the dead man. Secrets that someone killed to protect and will kill again to keep hidden. Will his unexpected kindness save her or doom them both? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, Montana territory. Ava Sinclair pressed her face to the window, watching curious townspeople gather on wooden sidewalks. Her hands trembled as she clutched the worn letter that had brought her across half the continent. The driver yanked open the door. End of the line, miss. Ava stepped down onto the packed earth, her dark blue traveling dress wrinkled from days of rough roads. Conversations stopped. Eyes turned toward her with expressions that shifted from curiosity to something colder. An elderly man spat into the dirt. That her? Samuel Morrison's bride, a woman whispered. The whispers carried on the wind. Ava straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She had come too far to show weakness now. You looking for Samuel Morrison? The voice belonged to a woman in an elegant green dress who approached from the general store. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged despite the frontier setting. I'm Margaret Durant. Ava nodded. I'm Ava Sinclair. I've traveled from Philadelphia. Margaret's smile never reached her eyes. Oh, my dear, no one told you. She placed a gloved hand over her heart. Samuel passed 2 weeks ago. Fever took him sudden. The words hit Ava like a physical blow. Her legs nearly buckled. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle of her shock. Poor thing came all this way for nothing, someone muttered. Should have stayed where she belonged, another voice added. Margaret stepped closer, her voice carrying across the street. I tried to convince Samuel this arrangement was unwise. A man should marry within his community, don't you think? She gestured to the watching faces. These good people have standards. Ava's throat tightened. Her savings were nearly gone. The return fare to Philadelphia might as well have been a fortune. Perhaps I could help you find passage back east, Margaret continued. As an act of Christian charity. Of course. The humiliation burned in Ava's chest. Every eye was on her, waiting to see her crumble. She had fled one trap only to find herself in another. That won't be necessary. The voice came from behind the crowd. A tall man stepped forward, his hat casting shadows across weathered features. He moved with quiet confidence, and the crowd parted for him. Luke Callahan, someone whispered. The foreman from the Broken Star. Luke stopped in front of Ava. His brown eyes held none of the judgment she had seen in the others. You don't have to pretend with me. The simple words broke something loose inside her chest. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she could breathe. Mrs. Wells could use help at the ranch, Luke continued. Room and board, fair wages, if you're interested. Margaret's smile tightened. Luke, surely you don't think it's appropriate to bring a stranger into Mrs. Wells's home? Mrs. Wells makes her own decisions. Luke's tone remained steady, but Ava caught the steel beneath it. A few townspeople nodded their approval, though others frowned. The division was clear. Luke had just drawn a line in the dust and everyone knew which side they were on. I accept, Ava said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Luke nodded to the stagecoach driver. Help the lady with her trunk. As they walked toward a waiting wagon, Ava felt the weight of watching eyes. Some held curiosity, others disapproval. but none held the vicious satisfaction she had seen moments before. "Why did you help me?" she asked once they were away from the crowd. Luke guided the horses down the dusty street. "Seen enough people get kicked when they're down. Never sat right with me." The Broken Star Ranch lay 3 miles outside town, nestled in a valley between rolling hills. The main house was modest but well-maintained. Cattle dotted the grassland, and the whole place spoke of honest work and careful management. Mrs. Catherine Wells proved to be a silver-haired woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Ava up and down, asked a few practical questions about cooking and cleaning, then showed her to a small room behind the kitchen. "Breakfast is at dawn," Mrs. Wells said. "Luke will show you what needs doing." That evening, Ava sat on the porch steps watching the sun set behind the mountains. The day's events felt like a strange dream. This morning she had been a mail-order bride with a future planned out before her. Tonight she was a ranch hand with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Luke emerged from the barn and crossed the yard. He settled on the steps beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Town takes some getting used to," he said. "Some towns do. Margaret Durant runs most of the social circles. Her word carries weight with certain people." Ava studied his profile in the fading light. "But not with you. I judge people by what they do, not what they look like or where they come from." The words hung between them. Ava felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had not expected to find in this harsh place. "What happened to Samuel Morrison?" she asked. Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Fever," they said. "Came on fast. Strange thing, though. He was healthy as a horse just days before." Something in his tone made Ava look at him sharply. "You don't think it was fever?" "I think Samuel Morrison had secrets, and secrets have a way of catching up with people out here." Dawn came early at the Broken Star Ranch. Ava's hands were raw from milking cows by the time the sun crested the mountains. Luke found her in the barn, checking the feed supplies with the methodical precision of someone who understood livestock. "You've done this before," he said. "My father owned a small farm outside Philadelphia. Before he died." Ava straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "These cattle need better mineral supplements. The grass here lacks what they get back east." Luke nodded slowly. Most hired hands barely knew which end of a cow to milk. "I'll ride into town today. Get what you need." The days fell into a rhythm. Ava worked alongside the ranch hands, earning their grudging respect through competence rather than charm. She could read the signs of sick cattle, knew when horses favored a hoof, understood the delicate balance of feed and pasture rotation. Mrs. Wells watched it all with sharp eyes. "Girls got sense," she told Luke one evening. "More than most of the men I've hired." In town, Margaret Durant's influence spread like ripples in still water. Shopkeepers grew cold when Ava entered. The banker refused to discuss ranch business with her directly. Children pointed and whispered on street corners. "She's after something," Margaret told anyone who would listen. "Mark my words, that woman didn't come all this way for love." But some people watched Ava's steady competence and began to wonder. The blacksmith nodded respectfully when she brought horses for shoeing. The grain merchant found her prices fair and her payments prompt. Slowly, grudgingly, a few cracks appeared in the wall of suspicion. 3 weeks after her arrival, a stranger rode into Copper Ridge. Harrison Webb was a thin man in an expensive suit who asked pointed questions at the hotel. He carried a leather satchel and spoke with the careful precision of someone accustomed to legal documents. "Looking for a Miss Ava Sinclair," he told the hotel clerk. "Urgent business regarding the Morrison estate." Word spread through town like wildfire. Margaret Durant appeared at the hotel within an hour, her face pale beneath carefully applied powder. "Whatever business you have can wait," she told Webb. "The woman you're looking for is hardly settled." Webb consulted his pocket watch. "The matter is time-sensitive, ma'am. If you could direct me to Miss Sinclair's current address." At the Broken Star Ranch, Ava was teaching one of the younger hands how to properly doctor a rope burn on a steer's leg when Luke rode up fast from town. "There's a lawyer asking for you," he said. "Says it's about Samuel Morrison." Ava's stomach dropped. The only legal business she could imagine involved debts or accusations. She had seen enough of both in Philadelphia. Webb arrived an hour later in a rented buggy, his city clothes already dusty from the rough road. Mrs. Wells invited him into the parlor, while Ava changed from her work clothes into the one good dress she owned. "Miss Sinclair," Webb began, opening his satchel, "I represent the estate of Samuel Morrison, deceased. I've been searching for you for some time." "I have no claim on his estate," Ava said quickly. "We never met, never exchanged vows." Webb smiled for the first time since his arrival. "Nevertheless, Mr. Morrison's will is quite specific." He withdrew a thick document. "To Miss Ava Sinclair of Philadelphia, should she arrive in Copper Ridge within 30 days of my death, I leave the entirety of my worldly possessions." The words seemed to echo in the small parlor. Mrs. Wells set down her teacup with a sharp clink. "I'm sorry," Ava said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" Webb's smile widened. "Congratulations, Miss Sinclair. You are now the owner of 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, the Morrison House and all its contents, substantial savings held in the Territorial Bank of Helena, and most importantly, the water rights to Morrison Creek." The room spun around Ava. She gripped the arms of her chair to keep from falling. "The water rights alone," Webb continued, "control irrigation for half the ranches in this valley. Mr. Morrison was a very wealthy man." Luke stepped forward from where he had been standing near the door. Why would he leave everything to a stranger? Webb consulted the will. His exact words were that he wanted his legacy to go to someone with the courage to build a new life in an unforgiving place. He believed Miss Sinclair possessed that courage. Mrs. Wells whistled low. "The Morrison spread is the biggest operation in 3 counties. When do I take possession?" Ava heard herself ask. "Immediately. I have the keys and deed transfers in my satchel." Webb began arranging papers on the small table. "There are a few signatures required, but the inheritance is legally yours." By evening, word had spread through Copper Ridge like a prairie fire. The woman who had arrived in tears 3 weeks ago was now the wealthiest landowner in the territory. The same people who had whispered cruel things now spoke her name with careful respect. Margaret Durant stood in her parlor window, watching the lawyer's buggy return to town. Her hands shook as she poured herself a generous measure of brandy. "This changes nothing," she whispered to her reflection in the glass. "Nothing at all." At the Broken Star Ranch, Ava walked the property lines alone as darkness fell. Everything had changed in the space of an afternoon. The woman who had fled Philadelphia with nothing now controlled land, water, and wealth beyond her wildest dreams. But wealth brought its own dangers. She had seen enough of the world to know that desperate people did desperate things when money was involved. Luke found her by the creek that marked the southern boundary of Mrs. Wells's property. Tomorrow, this creek and everything beyond it would belong to her. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified." The honesty surprised her. "This morning I was nobody. Tonight I own half the valley." "You were never nobody," Luke said quietly. "Not to me." The words hung between them in the cooling air. Ava felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with sudden wealth and everything to do with the man standing beside her. The Morrison house stood like a fortress on the hill overlooking Copper Ridge. 3 stories of solid timber and stone, with windows that caught the morning sun and threw it back in brilliant flashes. Ava walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture and imported carpets, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Luke followed her through the main hall, his expression unreadable. "Bigger than I remembered?" "Too big," Ava said. The house felt like a tomb, beautiful and cold. "Samuel lived here alone?" "Last 5 years after his parents passed, kept to himself mostly." In the study, ledgers lined the shelves in neat rows. Ava opened one and found Samuel's careful handwriting documenting cattle sales, land purchases, and water rights agreements. The numbers were staggering. The Morrison operation generated more income in a month than most ranchers saw in a year. "He was building something," she said, tracing columns of figures with her finger. Luke leaned over her shoulder to study the ledger. His presence was warm and solid, a comfort in the overwhelming strangeness of her new life. Question is what? The ranch hands arrived at dawn. 12 men who had worked for Samuel Morrison and now found themselves employed by a woman they barely knew. Some tipped their hats respectfully. Others made their skepticism clear through sideways glances and muttered conversations. Ava met them in the main yard, the morning sun behind her casting long shadows across the packed earth. She had dressed carefully in riding clothes that spoke of competence rather than wealth. "I know this situation is unusual," she began. "You worked for Mr. Morrison, not for me. Any man who wants to draw his pay and leave can do so with no hard feelings." 3 men stepped forward immediately. The rest remained in place, waiting. "For those who stay, things will run much as they did before. Luke Callahan will remain as foreman. Your wages will continue as agreed." She paused, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I ask only that you judge me by my actions, not by what others might say." One of the older hands, a grizzled man named Pete, cleared his throat. "What do you know about running cattle, miss? I know sick animals cost more than healthy ones. I know good pasture management means the difference between profit and loss. I know water is worth more than gold in this country." Her voice carried the authority of someone who understood the business. "What I don't know, I'll learn." Pete nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Within a week, strange things began happening on Morrison land. Fence posts were cut during the night, allowing cattle to wander onto neighboring property. A water trough was filled with dirt and stones. Someone drove nails into the wooden handles of essential tools, making them dangerous to use. Luke found Ava in the barn, examining a saddle that had been slashed with a knife. "This is escalating." "Any idea who?" "Could be anyone with a grudge against the Morrison name. Samuel made enemies over the years." Luke ran his fingers along the cut leather. "But the timing seems convenient." That afternoon, a stranger rode up the long drive to the Morrison house. Marcus Thornfield was a big man in an expensive coat, with the soft hands and calculating eyes of someone who made money from other people's sweat. He dismounted near the front porch and removed his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Miss Sinclair, I presume." "Marcus Thornfield, representing certain business interests in Denver." Ava remained on the porch, looking down at him. The height advantage was slight but deliberate. "What kind of business interests?" "The kind that pay well above market value for prime real estate." His smile was cold and practiced. "I'm prepared to offer you twice what this land is worth. Cash payment, immediate transfer. The land isn't for sale." Thornfield's smile never wavered. "Perhaps you don't understand the challenges facing a woman in your position. Running a ranch requires certain skills, certain connections. Without them, even the best property can become a burden." Luke appeared around the corner of the house, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "The lady said the land isn't for sale." Thornfield's eyes shifted to Luke, measuring him like a potential obstacle. "And you are?" "Someone who works for the lady." The tension stretched between them like a drawn bowstring. Thornfield replaced his hat and smiled again. But the warmth had gone out of it entirely. "Think about my offer, Miss Sinclair. Opportunities like this don't come along often." He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "I'll be in town for a few days if you change your mind." After he rode away, Ava felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He's not going to accept no for an answer. Men like that usually don't. That night, someone tried to burn down the main barn. Only Luke's quick action with bucket brigades saved the building and the horses inside. They found rags soaked in kerosene piled near the hay storage, along with a handful of matches that had failed to catch. Ava stood in the smoky darkness, watching Luke organize the cleanup. Her inheritance was becoming a battleground, and she was caught in the middle without knowing who her enemies were or what they ultimately wanted. "Why is everyone so interested in this land?" she asked Mrs. Wells the next morning over coffee. The older woman stirred her cup thoughtfully. Water rights, mostly. Morrison Creek feeds half the ranches in the valley. Control that water, control everything downstream. And the railroad companies? Mrs. Wells looked up sharply. What do you know about the railroad? Thornfield mentioned business interests in Denver. Railroad companies have business interests. They've been surveying through here for months, looking for the best route to connect with the transcontinental line. Morrison Creek would be perfect for watering locomotives and feeding worker camps. The pieces began falling into place in Ava's mind. Samuel's wealth, the water rights, Thornfield's aggressive offer, and now the systematic harassment of her operation. Someone wanted this land badly enough to kill for it. The thought stopped her cold. Samuel Morrison had died suddenly of fever. But Luke's doubts echoed in her memory. In a place where water meant survival and land meant power, fever might be a convenient explanation for something much darker. Samuel Morrison's personal belongings filled 3 dusty crates in the house's upper bedroom. Ava found them while searching for ranch records, hidden behind winter coats in a cedar wardrobe. Luke helped her carry the boxes downstairs to the study where they could examine everything properly. The first crate held clothing and personal items that revealed little beyond Samuel's careful nature. The second contained business correspondence dating back years, including letters from railroad companies and territorial officials. But the third crate held something unexpected. "Look at this," Ava said, lifting out a leather-bound journal. The entries began 3 months before Samuel's death. His handwriting was careful and precise, documenting meetings, conversations, and growing suspicions about his business associates. May 15th, Ava read aloud. Thornfield visited again today, insisted his offer was final. When I refused, he reminded me how quickly circumstances can change for a man living alone. Luke leaned closer to read over her shoulder. That sounds like a threat. She turned the page. May 22nd. Feeling poorly after dinner with Margaret. Strange taste in the wine. Must ask Doc Peterson about these stomach pains. The entries continued, documenting Samuel's declining health alongside his increasing paranoia about the people around him. He suspected someone was tampering with his food and drink, but couldn't identify the culprit. June 1st, Ava continued. Spoke with lawyer Webb about updating my will. If something happens to me, want my legacy to go to someone with strength to fight for what's right. The mail-order bride from Philadelphia might be that person. Luke sat back in his chair. He knew someone was trying to kill him, and he chose me as his weapon of revenge. The realization chilled Ava to the bone. She wasn't just an heiress. She was Samuel Morrison's final move in a deadly game. The last entry was dated 2 days before Samuel's death. Growing weaker daily, suspect the poisoning is accelerating. Hid in this journal where hopefully the right person will find it. Margaret knows too much about my habits, my schedule, my weaknesses, but she's not working alone. Someone with real money is behind this. Ava closed the journal with trembling hands. We need to show this to Sheriff Green. They found Sheriff Amos Green in his office, feet propped on his desk, reading wanted posters with the bored expression of a man who rarely dealt with serious crime. He was a lean, weathered man in his 50s who had kept the peace in Copper Ridge through practical solutions rather than heroic gestures. Green read the journal entries twice before speaking. This is serious accusation territory. Samuel Morrison was murdered, Luke said flatly. Samuel Morrison died of fever. Doc Peterson signed the death certificate. Green set the journal on his desk carefully. You're talking about reopening a case that was never opened. Ava leaned forward. Someone tried to burn my barn. They've been cutting fences, poisoning water troughs, destroying equipment. This isn't random vandalism. Green's expression shifted. For the first time, he looked genuinely interested. You're saying the attacks on your ranch are connected to Samuel's death? I'm saying someone wanted Samuel's land badly enough to kill for it. Now they're trying to force me to sell. Thornfield made that clear, Luke added. His offer came with barely veiled threats. Green stood and walked to his window, looking out at the dusty main street. Margaret Durant was real close to Samuel toward the end, brought him meals when he was sick, sat with him during his final days. According to the journal, she had access to his food and drink, Ava said. Margaret Durant is one of the most respected women in this territory. You're asking me to investigate her for murder based on a dead man's paranoid scribblings. Luke's jaw tightened. Those scribblings described symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Green turned back to them. Even if Samuel was poisoned, proving it now would be impossible. He's been in the ground for over a month. But we can investigate the current crimes, Ava said. The barn fire, the sabotage, the threats. If we can prove Thornfield is behind those, maybe we can connect him to Samuel's murder. Green considered this. That I can do. Arson and destruction of property are crimes I can prosecute. He picked up the journal again. I'll keep this as evidence, but I want you both to be careful. If someone killed Samuel Morrison, they won't hesitate to kill again. That evening, Luke found Ava on the front porch of the Morrison house, staring out at the valley that now belonged to her. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Having second thoughts? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. Every minute. She turned to look at him. A month ago, I was running away from one dangerous man. Now I'm fighting a conspiracy that involves murder and railroad money. You could sell, take Thornfield's offer, and start over somewhere safe. Could you? If someone murdered your friend and tried to steal everything he worked for? Luke was quiet for a long moment. Samuel Morrison wasn't my friend. But you are. The simple statement hung between them in the cooling air. Ava felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. Luke, there's something you should know about me, about why I really left Philadelphia. I know enough. You know I fled an arranged marriage. You don't know that the man was violent, that he put me in the hospital twice before the wedding was even announced. The words came out in a rush. My father arranged the marriage to pay gambling debts. I was collateral in a business deal. Luke's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, but his voice remained steady. That's behind you now. Is it? I've spent my whole life running from powerful men who think they can control me. Now I'm fighting another one. This time you're not running alone. The promise in his words made something warm unfold in Ava's chest. For the first time since finding Samuel's journal, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could win this fight. But in town, Margaret Durant paced her parlor like a caged animal, her carefully controlled composure finally cracking. Thornfield sat in her best chair, his expensive boots propped on her coffee table. The journal changes everything, she said, if they can prove Samuel suspected me. Then we accelerate the timeline, Thornfield replied calmly. Some problems require permanent solutions. Sheriff Green arrived at the Morrison Ranch before dawn, his face grim in the lamplight. He dismounted quickly and strode to where Ava and Luke waited on the front porch. Found something you need to see, he said, pulling a bundle of letters from his saddlebag. Searched Margaret Durant's house last night with a territorial warrant. Ava took the letters with trembling hands. The first envelope bore Samuel Morrison's name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Harrison Webb, dated 6 weeks before Samuel's death, explaining his search for Miss Ava Sinclair of Philadelphia. This should have reached Samuel 3 weeks before he died, Green said. Instead, Margaret intercepted it along with 5 other letters from the lawyer. Luke examined the postmarks. She was stealing his mail. Gets worse. Green handed Ava another document. Found this hidden in her bedroom. It's a contract promising Thornfield exclusive rights to purchase the Morrison property for half its assessed value. The contract was signed in Margaret's careful script and dated just days after Samuel's funeral. Ava stared at the paper, her hands shaking with anger rather than fear. She killed him for money. That's what we're going to prove. Green's voice held steel. But I need her to confess. The evidence is strong but not conclusive for a territorial court. They didn't have to wait long. Margaret Durant arrived at the ranch house that afternoon, her buggy raising dust clouds on the long drive. She wore her best dress and carried herself with the dignity of someone making a social call. Ava met her on the front porch, with Luke and Sheriff Green positioned nearby but out of immediate sight. "Such a lovely day," Margaret said, climbing the porch steps with practiced grace. "I thought we might have tea and discuss your future in our community." "I know about the letters," Ava said quietly. Margaret's smile flickered but held. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "The letters from Harrison Webb, the ones you stole from Samuel's mail." Ava pulled the bundle from behind her back. "The ones that would have brought me here weeks earlier." This time Margaret's composure cracked entirely. Her face went pale beneath the carefully applied powder, and her hands began to shake. "You don't understand the situation," Margaret said. "Samuel was making a terrible mistake, bringing a stranger into our community, someone who doesn't belong here. Someone who would inherit what you thought should be yours. I cared for him." The words came out sharp and desperate. "I nursed him when he was sick, kept him company during those long evenings. I earned the right to his consideration." Ava stepped closer. "You poisoned him. I never meant for it to go so far." The confession burst out of Margaret like water through a broken dam. "The arsenic was just supposed to make him weak, dependent on me. He was supposed to realize he needed someone to take care of him." Luke emerged from the shadows near the door, his face hard with disgust. Sheriff Green followed, his hand resting on his gun. "Margaret Durant," Green said formally, "you're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Morrison." Margaret's legs gave out. She sank onto the porch steps, her elegant dress pooling around her like spilled ink. "He chose a stranger over me," she whispered. "A woman he'd never even met. After everything I did for him, everything I sacrificed." "What about Thornfield?" Luke demanded. "What about the railroad money?" Margaret laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Marcus promised me enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere people didn't know what I'd become." She looked up at Ava with hatred burning in her eyes. "But you came anyway. Even dead, Samuel found a way to cheat me." Sheriff Green pulled Margaret to her feet with surprising gentleness. "Come on, Margaret. Let's get this finished." As they walked toward Green's horse, Margaret turned back one final time. "You think you've won something, but this land will destroy you just like it destroyed him. There's too much money involved, too many powerful people who want what you have." "Let them come," Ava said. "I'm not Samuel Morrison, and I'm not alone." After Green led Margaret away in shackles, Luke and Ava stood together on the porch watching the dust settle on the empty road. "Thornfield will try again," Luke said. "Men like him don't give up easily." "Then we'll be ready for him." Ava's voice carried a strength that surprised her. "Samuel Morrison chose me to fight this battle. I intend to win it." The news of Margaret Durant's arrest spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. Some townspeople expressed shock and disbelief, but others admitted they had suspected something was wrong with Samuel's sudden death. The revelation that one of their most respected citizens was a murderer shattered assumptions and forced uncomfortable questions about judgment and prejudice. Thornfield left town that same night, taking the evening stage to Denver without bothering to settle his hotel bill. The railroad's interest in Morrison Creek would have to find another avenue of approach. At the Broken Star Ranch, Mrs. Marr Wells poured herself a generous measure of whiskey and raised her glass toward the Morrison house, visible on the distant hill. "Here's to Samuel Morrison," she said to her empty parlor. The man knew how to pick his battles. In the territorial jail, Margaret Durant sat on her narrow cot staring at the barred window. She had lost everything that mattered to her, destroyed by the jealousy and greed that had seemed so reasonable just weeks before. The woman she had tried to destroy now owned half the valley and had earned the respect of people who once scorned her. Margaret's final gamble had failed spectacularly, and justice would be swift and certain. At the Morrison house, Ava walked through rooms that no longer felt like a tomb. Tomorrow she would face new challenges, new enemies, new obstacles to the life she was building. But tonight, for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she felt truly safe. The truth had set her free, and the future stretched ahead full of possibilities she had never dared imagine. The territorial court convened in Helena 3 weeks later. Margaret Durant stood before Judge William Harrison in shackles, her once perfect appearance now haggard and broken. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Samuel's journal, the stolen letters, the contract with Thornfield, and her own confession created a case no defense attorney could challenge. Margaret Durant, Judge Harrison announced, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years hard labor at the Territorial Prison for the murder of Samuel Morrison. Ava watched from the gallery as Margaret was led away. There was no satisfaction in seeing her enemy's downfall, only a hollow sense of justice finally served. Samuel Morrison could rest in peace, knowing his killer faced consequences. Outside the courthouse, Harrison Webb shook Ava's hand with genuine warmth. Samuel would be proud of how you've handled his legacy. I never got to thank him properly. You honored his trust. That's thanks enough. The ride back to Copper Ridge took 2 days through mountain passes painted gold by autumn leaves. Luke rode beside Ava's wagon, their comfortable silence speaking of a partnership that had weathered its first storm. What happens now? He asked as they crested the final hill before home. We build something better than what came before. The town that greeted them had changed in subtle but important ways. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Ava now nodded respectfully when she passed. Shopkeepers greeted her by name and meant it. Children no longer pointed and whispered, but watched with curious interest. At the general store, the elderly clerk who had once refused to serve her now asked about her cattle and offered advice about winter feed. Small changes, but they added up to something larger. Funny how people's attitudes shift when they realize they were wrong, Mrs. Wells observed over dinner at the Broken Star Ranch. Some people, Ava corrected, others just follow whoever holds the power. Power's a funny thing out here. Samuel Morrison had it because he controlled the water. Now you do. I'd rather have respect. Mrs. Wells smiled. Earn one, the other follows naturally. The Morrison ranch house no longer felt like a mausoleum. Ava had moved Samuel's personal belongings to the attic and filled the empty rooms with her own touches. Books from Philadelphia, a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother, curtains that let in more light than Samuel's heavy drapes ever had. Luke spent most evenings there now, reviewing ranch business and planning for the future. Their relationship had deepened through shared trials, growing from mutual respect into something neither of them had expected to find. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, he said one evening as they sat by the fireplace. Ava looked up from the book she'd been reading. What's that? Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, simple and direct as everything else about Luke Callahan. Ava set down her book and studied his face in the firelight. Are you sure? People will say you're after my money. People said worse things about both of us when you had nothing. Their opinions haven't improved my life any. And you're not after my money? Luke's smile was gentle and sure. I fell in love with a woman who milked cows at dawn and stood up to bullies. The money's just a complication we'll work through together. Ava felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears she'd shed stepping off that stagecoach months ago. These came from joy rather than despair. Yes, she said simply. They married on a crisp October morning in the small church overlooking Copper Ridge. Half the town attended, including people who had once wished Ava gone. Sheriff Green gave her away in the absence of family. Mrs. Wells cried openly during the simple ceremony. The wedding dinner was held at the Morrison house, now officially the Callahan Ranch. Luke had insisted on taking Ava's name hyphenated with his own, a gesture that surprised the guests but pleased his bride enormously. To new beginnings, Sheriff Green toasted, raising his glass of apple cider. To justice served, added Mrs. Wells. To love that conquers all, finished the preacher with a smile. In the months that followed, Ava and Luke transformed more than just their personal lives. They established a school that welcomed all children regardless of background, hiring a teacher from back east who shared their progressive views. They negotiated fair water rights agreements with neighboring ranchers, replacing Samuel's sometimes harsh business practices with cooperative partnerships. The railroad eventually came through the valley, but on terms that benefited the entire community rather than outside speculators. Ava's control of the water rights gave her leverage to ensure fair compensation for all affected landowners. Thornfield made one final attempt to acquire the Morrison properties, sending lawyers from Denver with complicated legal challenges. But Ava had learned to fight such battles, and her wealth could afford the best legal representation available. The challenges failed completely. On the first anniversary of her arrival in Copper Ridge, Ava stood on the front porch of her house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Luke joined her, slipping his arm around her waist in the easy intimacy of a marriage built on genuine partnership. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About which part?" "Coming here, fighting for this place, staying when it would have been easier to leave." Ava leaned into his warmth and surveyed the valley that now felt like home. The cattle were healthy, the land was productive, and the community was slowly learning to judge people by character rather than appearance. "I regret that Samuel Morrison had to die for me to find this life," she said finally. "But I'll spend the rest of my days making sure his sacrifice meant something." Luke kissed the top of her head. "I think you already have." In the distance, lights began flickering on in the houses of Copper Ridge. Each light represented a family, a story, a life made possible by the water that flowed from Morrison Creek. Ava Morrison Callahan had inherited more than land and money. She had inherited the responsibility to protect and nurture an entire community. It was a responsibility she embraced with the same courage that had brought her west in the first place, seeking a better life in an unforgiving land.